There is a kind of trap that does not look like a trap. It looks like an answered prayer. It looks like a Sunday morning, a man with his Bible open, a future that finally makes sense. And by the time you realize what has happened to you, you have already given away 5 years of your life to someone who called it love. This is the story of Margaret, a woman who prayed for a partner, found one in the most sacred place she knew, and spent the next 5 years slowly disappearing inside a marriage that the whole church called blessed. If you have ever felt small inside a relationship that was supposed to make you feel whole, stay with me, because Margaret's story is going to change the way you see things. And before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Margaret was 51 years old when she met Robert. Now, some people will hear that number and think the story starts too late. But for Margaret, 51 was exactly when her life was supposed to begin again. She had raised 2 children mostly on her own after her first husband walked out when the youngest was barely 3 years old. She had worked 23 years as a licensed practical nurse at a regional hospital in central Ohio. She had put both kids through college, one of them on a partial scholarship she had spent months helping him apply for. She had buried her mother. She had renovated her small house herself with YouTube tutorials and sheer stubbornness. And she had done all of it without losing her faith. That faith was everything to her. She attended Grace Fellowship Church every Sunday without exception. She was in the women's Bible study every Thursday evening. She helped organize the holiday food drives. She visited sick members in the hospital sometimes on her days off, just because no one else had gone yet. She was not the loudest woman in the room, but she was the one people counted on when things got hard. Her children were grown and building their own lives. Her house was quiet in the evenings. And Margaret, if she was honest with herself, was lonely. Not the desperate kind of lonely, just the quiet kind. The kind that settles in when the television is on and you realize you are only watching it to fill the silence. She prayed about it honestly, the way people who have known God for a long time pray, without performance, without pressure. She simply told him the truth. Lord, I would like someone to share this life with. If that is your will, I trust your timing. She did not chase it. She did not download any apps. She did not change her routine. She just kept showing up to her life the same way she always had. And then Robert walked in. He came to Grace Fellowship on a Sunday in March, introduced by the associate pastor as a man who had recently relocated from Indiana after retiring from a career in municipal finance. He was 60 years old, broad-shouldered, silver at his temples, with a calm, unhurried way of moving through a room that made people feel at ease. He had a deep voice that he used carefully. He did not volunteer opinions. He listened. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered what you told him. Within 2 months, he was leading the men's accountability group. Within 3, the senior pastor was publicly praising him from the pulpit as an example of a man who walked in integrity. Women in the congregation would smile at Margaret knowingly. That man keeps looking at you, they would whisper. Margaret would wave them off. But he was. And one Sunday afternoon in the parking lot after service, he said it plainly. Margaret, I would love to take you to dinner sometime if you would allow me. She said yes. Of course she said yes. The courtship was slow and careful in a way that felt respectful. Robert did not rush anything. He opened doors. He called when he said he would. He asked about her children and actually remembered the details the next time he brought them up. He asked about her career and seemed genuinely impressed. You have held so much together, he said to her one evening over dinner. Most people would have fallen apart. You should be proud of that. She had not heard those words in a very long time. Her eyes filled before she could stop them, and he just handed her a napkin and waited. No awkwardness, no impatience, no discomfort. Just patience. She thought, this is what it is supposed to feel like. Robert proposed 8 months later. Not in a restaurant, not publicly. He did it privately at her kitchen table on a Tuesday evening after they had prayed together. He said, I believe God has shown me that you are the woman I am supposed to walk the rest of this life with. I am not a perfect man, Margaret, but I will be faithful. I will honor you, and I will never make you feel small. She said yes before he finished the sentence. The wedding was everything Margaret had quietly waited decades for. Small and meaningful, held in the Fellowship Hall of Grace Church. Her two sons walked her down the aisle together, one on each side, and her older son was trying so hard not to cry that his jaw was shaking the entire walk. Her grandchildren, 3 of them, sat in the front row in matching outfits her daughter-in-law had sewn by hand. Her friends from Bible study stood in a row crying openly, holding each other, the way women do when one of their own finally gets the thing she deserved all along. The pastor preached on covenant, on what it means to build a home on something real. Robert held her hands through the entire ceremony. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at. Her older son leaned over to Daniel and whispered. Mom finally caught a break. Margaret believed that with everything she had. The first sign was so quiet she almost did not register it. They were 3 months in. She had been invited to a weekend nursing conference in Columbus, a professional development opportunity her hospital offered to long-term staff. She had attended twice before and always found it energizing. She mentioned it over dinner, excited, already thinking about what sessions she would sign up for. Robert set down his fork. A whole weekend away? She nodded. It is good for my career. They cover the hotel. He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Margaret, you are a married woman now. A whole weekend away from your home, your husband. I just wonder what message that sends. She blinked. To who? To people at the church. To our community. He tilted his head slightly. I am not saying no. I just want you to think about how things look. We are still newlyweds. What does it say about our marriage if my wife is off at a hotel for the weekend without me? She did not go to the conference. She told herself it was a small sacrifice, that he had a point, that she wanted to prioritize their new beginning. She did not know yet that this was the first door he was closing. By month 5, he had opinions about her phone. Started as jokes. Who keeps you so busy? He would tease when she was texting her son. Just her son, she would laugh back. He would smile. But the teasing became questions. Questions became requests. Margaret, I really think couples should be transparent with each other. I would love for us to have an open phone policy. She agreed because she had nothing to hide. She never considered that the problem was not her hiding anything. The problem was that he would now decide what was acceptable. He read her messages with her daughter-in-law. He frowned at a group chat she had with women from Bible study, women she had known for 15 years. That woman Linda, he said one evening, pointing at a thread. She does not seem like a good influence. The things she jokes about. Margaret had known Linda for 18 years. Linda had sat with her in the hospital when her mother was dying. Margaret had held Linda's hand through a cancer scare 3 years earlier. She tried to say as much. Robert simply said, I trust your judgment. I just want to protect our home. That is all I ask. She quietly stopped responding as often in the group chat. Linda noticed. She texted to ask if everything was okay. Margaret said she was just adjusting to married life. She stared at that text for a long time after she sent it. Because even as she typed it, something in her knew it was not true. A year in, Margaret's world had gotten measurably smaller and she had not seen it happening. She still went to church. She still went to work. But the retirement plans she had been quietly building for 2 years, opening a small consultancy to help elderly patients navigate aftercare and insurance, that had gone into a drawer somewhere. Every time she brought it up, Robert had a reason it was not the right time. You are not 60 yet, Margaret. We are still getting settled. Do you really want that kind of stress on your body at this stage? I just worry about you. That is all. He always framed it as concern. And because she had spent nearly 2 decades with no one worrying about her at all, it took her longer than she wanted to admit to hear it for what it actually was. The criticism came next. Slow, like water wearing down stone. If the house was not clean to his standard, he would sigh. A long, heavy, disappointed sound. Then he would say nothing. Just let the silence fill the room until she asked what was wrong. And he would say, I just had a long day. I like coming home to peace. I thought you understood that about me. And she would spend the next hour retracing everything she had done, trying to figure out what she had missed. If her cooking was not what he wanted, He would eat quietly, leave the table early, and she would lie awake that night going through the meal in her mind, wondering where she had failed. If she dressed for church in a color he found too bright, he would look at her and say, "Is that what you are wearing?" Not an instruction, just a question, just enough to make her change. And she would come back out in something muted and watch his face relax into approval and feel something she could not name twist inside her chest. He started comparing her to other women. Pastor's wife Sharon. Now there is a woman who knows how to run a home. The way she serves without complaining. You can see the peace on her face. Margaret would nod and feel something hollow open in her chest. She had met Sharon twice. Sharon looked tired too. Margaret just had not let herself see it yet. He used scripture the way some people use a scalpel. Precise. Deliberate. The husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church. He would quote it quietly, calmly, in the middle of arguments that had nothing to do with theology. As if God had personally handed him the rulebook and Margaret had missed the meeting. And at church he was extraordinary. He prayed with his eyes closed and his voice full of reverence. He helped elderly members to their seats. He donated generously during stewardship drives. He called Margaret his blessing from God and held her hand during praise and worship with the tenderness of a man deeply in love. People would squeeze her arm after service. "You are so lucky. He is such a good man." She would smile and agree. She would say, "I know." And she would mean it still even then because she was not ready yet to look at the whole picture and call it what it was. The phone call she missed changed something inside her that never quite went back. It was a Wednesday afternoon. She had been in a long patient intake and had her phone on silent. When she checked it on her break, she had 4 missed calls. All from her younger son Daniel. Her heart dropped. She called him back immediately. He answered on the first ring. "Mom. Hey. It is okay. Everything is okay." She pressed her hand flat against her chest. "What happened?" His voice broke slightly. "It is Rosie. She fell at school. She is okay, they think just a sprain, but she was scared and she kept asking for you and I could not reach you and I did not know what to do and I..." Rosie. Her granddaughter. 7 years old. The one who called her Grammy Maggie and drew pictures of the two of them holding hands outside her house. Margaret stood in the hospital hallway and felt the tears come before she could stop them. She had missed her granddaughter crying for her. She had missed it because she now kept her phone on silent so it would not ring at dinner and cause an argument with Robert. She went home that evening and she did not tell Robert what had happened. Not because she was afraid of what he would say, but because she already knew he would find a way to make Rosie's fall about Margaret not managing her priorities correctly. And she was not willing to let him touch that moment. She held it privately, that small terrible grief, and something behind her ribs hardened a little. It was her son Daniel who first said the word out loud. He had driven up from Cincinnati for a visit on a Saturday when Robert was away at a men's retreat. Margaret had not planned it that way, but when she opened the door and saw her youngest child standing on her porch with a paper bag of her favorite pastries from the bakery she had loved since before he was born, something in her face must have given everything away, because Daniel stood still for a moment and then he said, quietly, "Mom." She let him in. She made coffee. She sat across from him at the kitchen table where 8 months earlier she had said yes to a man she thought was an answer. She did not plan to say anything. And then she said everything. She told him about the conference she had not attended, the certification she had turned down, the way her phone was no longer private, the way she flinched now when she heard his car in the driveway, the way she had stopped calling Linda because it always seemed to create tension, the way she checked the clock all evening when she was at work and calculated backward. How long until he gets home? Is the house right? Is dinner right? Am I right? Daniel sat very still through all of it. His jaw was tight. His hands were wrapped around his coffee mug like he needed something to hold on to. When she finished, he looked at her and said, "Mom, that is not a marriage. That is a cage." She shook her head. "He has never hurt me." Daniel leaned forward. "Mom, he is hurting you every single day. You just cannot see it because he does not leave marks where anyone can look." She did not say anything for a long moment. Outside, a neighbor was mowing their lawn. The sound of it was very ordinary, very distant. Daniel reached across the table and took her hands. I need you to hear me. You are the strongest person I have ever known in my life. You raised me by yourself. You worked doubles so I could go on school trips. You sat in that hospital for 11 days straight when Grandma was dying and you never once fell apart. And I am watching you apologize for existing in your own house and I cannot take it anymore. Margaret looked down at her son's hands around hers. His hands that she had held when he was 3 years old and frightened and did not know how to say what was wrong. And she thought about how that same child was sitting here now, doing the same thing for her. She cried. Not quietly. The real kind of crying she had not allowed herself in years. The kind that bends you forward and takes your breath and does not care who sees it. Daniel did not say anything. He just moved his chair around the table and put his arm around her and let her. She cried for the conference she had not attended. For the certification she had turned down. For Rosie calling for her on a Wednesday afternoon. For the woman she used to be, who wore bright colors without asking permission and laughed too loud and had plans. She cried for every dinner she had eaten carefully, every word she had measured before she said it, every morning she had woken up and felt the weight of the day before she even opened her eyes. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she sat up, wiped her face, breathed, and Daniel said, "Tell me what you need." The night it became physical started the way their worst nights always did. With something small. She had been on the phone with Daniel. Just checking in the way they had started doing more often since his visit. Robert walked in, listened for a moment, and when she hung up, his face was closed and hard. What were you telling him about us? Nothing. We were just talking. His eyes narrowed. You were on the phone for 40 minutes, Margaret. About what? She was past the point where she carefully measured every word for safety. She was tired in a way that had gone deeper than sleep could reach. And without planning it, she said, Robert, I am going to be honest with you. I feel like I cannot breathe in this house. I feel like everything I do is being watched and judged and found wrong. I need things to change. The silence that followed had weight. Then he said, slowly, you feel like you cannot breathe. Yes. He moved so quickly she did not have time to step back. The slap was open-handed and hard, and it hit the side of her face with a sound that was obscenely loud in the quiet house. She stumbled back into the counter. Her ear was ringing. She looked at him with her hand pressed to her cheek, and he was looking at his own hand like it belonged to someone else. Then he looked at her and said, You pushed me to that. And in that moment something crystallized inside Margaret with a clarity she had not felt in years. She thought about Daniel's hands around hers at the kitchen table. She thought about Rosie crying for her on a Wednesday. She thought about the woman who had renovated a house by herself with YouTube tutorials. She thought about 23 years of showing up. And she thought, not again. Never again. She did not run that night. She waited. Because she had spent 23 years being smart and she was not going to stop now. She went to work the next morning with a foundation layer over her cheek and she told Linda what had happened. Linda drove her to the courthouse on her lunch break without a word of judgment. Margaret filed for a domestic violence protective order and sat in the parking lot afterward and looked at the paper in her hands and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not relief. Not grief. Just clarity. The terrifying, clean feeling of a decision that has already been made. She called Daniel from the car. He answered before the second ring. Are you safe right now? He asked first. Yes. Are you ready? She looked at the paper in her hands. Yes. He was on the road within the hour. Her older son met him at her house. Margaret came home from work to find both of her boys standing in her kitchen, and her bags were already packed because Linda had helped her do it the week before, and her most important documents were in a folder she had organized the way she organized everything, carefully, completely, because she had always been the kind of woman who prepared. Robert came home and found all three of them there. He looked at her sons. He looked at her bags. He looked at Margaret. And she saw something in his face that she had never seen before. He was afraid. He started talking about the church, about vows, about what God joined together. Daniel stepped forward and said, very quietly, Sir, stop talking. Robert stopped talking. Margaret picked up her bag. She looked at the house she had moved into with hope, the kitchen she had cooked in carefully every night. the chair where she had sat and read her Bible and prayed for patience. She looked at all of it. Then she walked out the front door and did not look back. What followed in the church nearly broke her in a different way. Some people were extraordinary. Linda was there every day. A handful of women from Thursday Bible study showed up at her temporary apartment with groceries and sat on the floor with her when she did not want to sit at the table. They did not ask her to explain herself. They just stayed. But others did not. An assistant pastor left her a voicemail suggesting that perhaps with more counseling, with more willingness on both sides, a restoration was still possible. As if restoration was something she owed the man who had hit her and then told her she had caused it. 2 women she had known for years stopped calling after the divorce was filed. She saw them at a church event she attended briefly, and they smiled at her tightly and moved on, and she understood. She had broken the story that everyone wanted to believe. The one where Robert was a good man and they were a blessed couple and everything in their community was as it appeared. She had broken it by simply telling the truth. And the truth cost her those friendships, and a community she had belonged to for years, and the version of herself who had believed that if you just prayed hard enough and tried hard enough and endured long enough, God would fix the unfixable. That loss was real. She did not rush past it. She sat in it. She let herself grieve the marriage she had thought she was getting. The man she had believed he was. The future she had imagined on a Tuesday night at her kitchen table when she had said yes before he finished the sentence. She cried for all of it. In the car sometimes. In the shower. Once, memorably, in the cereal aisle of a Kroger on a Sunday morning when she passed the brand Robert had always wanted and she realized she had bought it every week for 2 years even though she did not like it, and she had not even noticed herself doing it, and the smallness of that, the quiet automatic erasure of her own preference in something as ordinary as cereal, undid her completely. She stood in that aisle and cried, and an elderly woman stopped her cart and put a hand on her arm and said, "Honey, whatever it is, you are going to be okay." And Margaret laughed through her tears and said, "I know. I really think I am." The first year after the divorce was the slow work of remembering who she was. She had to relearn what she liked to eat when no one was watching her portions. She had to remember that she could laugh loudly without apologizing for it. She bought herself a bright yellow blouse on a Tuesday for no reason and wore it to work the next day, and 3 colleagues told her she looked wonderful, and she stood in the bathroom on her break and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She looked like herself. She had almost forgotten what that looked like. She went back to her supervisor and asked about the certification cohort. Her supervisor, a woman who had watched Margaret for years and understood more than she had ever been asked to confirm, simply said, "I was hoping you would ask." Margaret earned her geriatric care specialist certification on a Thursday in April. Daniel and her older son drove up and took her to dinner afterward at a restaurant she had chosen herself without consulting anyone. Her grandchildren sent a video. Rosie was holding a hand-drawn sign that said Grammy Maggie is the smartest, with a drawing of Margaret in a graduation cap that was 3 times the size of her head. Margaret put it on her refrigerator where it stayed for a year. On a Friday morning 2.5 years after walking out of her house with a bag and her documents, Margaret opened Steadfast. It was a consultancy. 3 rooms in a professional suite on the east side of town. She helped elderly patients and their families navigate the confusing stretch between hospital discharge and home, the gap that so many people fell through alone. She had lived in that gap professionally for 23 years. She knew every inch of it. Within the first year, she had taken on a part-time assistant. Within 18 months, she had a waiting list. Within 2 years, her name was being passed between hospital social workers and discharge nurses as the person you call when a family does not know what to do next. She looked different, and everyone who had known her before said so. Her shoulders sat differently. She wore the colors she liked. She laughed the way she used to laugh, without covering her mouth, without checking the room first. She talked about her work with the kind of aliveness that makes other people lean in. Daniel called her one evening just to tell her something. "Mom, you sound like yourself again." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I feel like myself again." For the first time in a really long time. She ran into Robert once, 2 years after the divorce was finalized, at a pharmacy near her office. He was in the cold and flu aisle. She was picking up a prescription. They saw each other at the same moment. He said her name. She nodded. "Robert." He said, "You look well." She said, I am. He looked older. Smaller somehow, the way people sometimes do when the thing that was inflating them is gone. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something else and then seemed to think better of it. Margaret looked at him. This man who had read her messages and monitored her movements and told her she was nothing without him. This man who had hit her and then told her she had caused it. This man who had handed her back 2 years of her own life in the form of a protective order and a courthouse parking lot and a clarity that had never left. She felt nothing that surprised her. No rage. No grief. No pull. Just the mild acknowledgement of something that had happened to her and that she had survived. She finished at the prescription counter and walked out into the afternoon and got into her car and sat for a moment with her hands on the wheel. Then she called Linda. I just ran into Robert. Silence. Then, are you okay? Margaret thought about it honestly. Yes, I really am. Linda exhaled. Good. Now come over. I made that soup you like. Margaret laughed. She was already driving. Margaret is 61 years old now. She wakes up in the morning and the first thing she feels is quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means something is wrong and you are waiting to find out what. The real kind. The kind where nothing is coiled. Just morning and coffee and the sound of birds outside a window she can open whenever she wants to. Rosie comes to see her most weekends. She is 10 now, missing her 2 front teeth, absolutely certain that Grammy Maggie's office is the most interesting place in the world. She sits at the small desk in the waiting room and pretends to be a receptionist and answers the phone in a very serious voice, and Margaret watches her from across the room and thinks, This is what I almost lost. And she does not let herself think that too long. Because she did not lose it. She chose it. She went back for it. She built it with her own hands the way she built everything, carefully, stubbornly, without asking anyone for permission. There is a version of Margaret's story that ends with her still in that house. Still buying the cereal she did not like. Still flinching at the sound of a car in the driveway. Still praying for patience when what she needed was a door and the courage to walk through it. That version does not end well. She knew it that night with her back against the counter and her hand on her cheek. If she stayed, that story only went one direction. She chose a different story. And if you are watching this tonight and you are living inside the early pages of what Margaret lived through, hear this clearly. The quietness you feel around him is not peace. Peace does not require you to shrink. Peace does not ask you to earn it every day by being less. The isolation is not protection. It is architecture. He is building a world where only his voice echoes back to you, so that eventually his voice becomes the only one you believe. The scripture is not guidance. It is a weapon. Any theology that requires your suffering as evidence of your faithfulness is not God speaking. It is someone who has learned that God's name is the most effective way to keep you from leaving. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to want a life that does not require you to disappear inside it. There are women on the other side of this who look like Margaret, who wear bright colors on a Tuesday for no reason, who laugh without checking the room first, who sit at a desk they built and a business they earned and watch their grandchildren answer the phone in a serious voice and feel, all the way down, that they are exactly where they are supposed to be. That is not a fantasy. That is a choice. And it is available to you. You just have to decide that your life is worth saving. Margaret did. And it was. If the story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us what part of Margaret's story moved you most. We read every single one. And if you are ready to hear more stories like this one, Fireside Tales has more